in your eye.
Hello, hello, everyone, and welcome to Danger Mom Mondays. Just making sure our audio is coming through. As far as I can tell, we are good. All right. Well, with me today is a very special guest. I will do a little bit of housekeeping before I introduce her. Obviously, she's just sitting here as I talk. But what I wanted to go over was I feel like I've been a little bit of a bad danger mom as of late, a little neglectful of my little D&D babies out there. Of course, I was out of town visiting a friend of mine. We might get into that. And then the very next week, I was supposed to come back to Danger Mom Mondays and start back up again. And of course, I had a fantastic, wonderful sinus infection, which lasted almost the entire week. So, but now I'm back, baby, and we are hitting the ground running with an interview with Cassie Clark of the renowned and spooktacular Call of Cthulhu RPG podcast, The Lovelycraftians. Cassie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Multi-class theater. I've played Anka, and in the most recent season, I'm playing Buck, and they are honestly, it's so fun. I don't know why they allowed me to crash, but they sure did, and I'm just really glad that they adopted me anyway. I think that about covers what I'm doing currently. So
Fantastic. Can I actually get you to do a shorter version of your intro? I caught the last half, but I think I had you muted on my end for a little bit of that. So I do apologize.
oh, killing me, Smalls. Yeah, no, it's fine. The joys of streaming. It's always something.
Yeehaw.
Okay, so the Too Long Didn't Read. I'm the game mistress for the Lovelycraftians. I am on Real Women of Gaming's That Which Can Eternal Lie series, and I'm also Anka and Buck in multi-class theater.
Yes, the plethora of things. Thank you for being here. Of course, as I alluded to, that trip that I went on, it was myself, Taylor of ChasmQuest, went up to Chicago to visit Cass, and it was such a fun time seeing you hanging out in real life. But yeah, I just want to say thanks for hosting us, and now here on the stream and soon to be hopefully on like the YouTubes and all that, a little rehash of our slide behind my DM screen from the years ago when we tried that out. I'm so glad to talk to you and kind of pick your brain about different types of RPGs that you've been running, been a part of, different projects, etc. But yeah, why don't you kind of give the elevator pitch for the Lovelycraftians, kind of your brainchild, your creation, the chasm quest to your danger mom of your world.
Yeah, so the Lovelycraftians is an all-femme group playing Call of Cthulhu. We're just tackling that cosmic horror in a way that is a little bit more accessible, because it's not necessarily a gentle system, and it's also not necessarily a niche that has a whole lot of female representation. So that's sort of why we got started. And then it really just took on its own little thing and became its own tulpa of ridiculous creativity, and my players just went absolutely nuts with their characters. And yeah, we went for 4 seasons. We're not done yet. We're just on hiatus currently. But after the big finale, I think everybody needed a break.
Woof. I think even too as like a listener, that was like such a huge moment to come to. Everything kind of culminated, and I kind of started listening to the Lovelies at the beginning of season 4. Kind of one of the biggest things that cued me into even listening to you all was like the artwork done for your main player characters, and each character just seemed so intriguing, and I wanted to know more about them. And so I listened to the vignettes of how you introduce Esther and the rest of the gang, and those little vignettes were so cool and did what I think you had set them out to do, which was give the listener just enough to become interested and then dive into the main series once the adventure began.
Yeah, that was so those were our session zeros, and those started way back in season 2 when I had to sort of reset where we were because we'd shifted realities and also lost a character, and we had to introduce a new one. So we just set up these individual session zeros to like, okay, here's where you are in this world. And that carried through into season 3 when we obviously had this huge time jump between season 2 that was technically in 1918, 1919, all the way up to 20, God, 53, I think is when we bumped up to. There was a lot of math involved. That I was like very meticulous about, and I immediately threw it out as soon as I didn't need it anymore. So that's gone.
What's that?
But
A game master prepping something that got thrown out later? Unheard of.
Never. We never did that. Except all the time, forever, every single day. It did come into play eventually, but my brain has just forgotten it now. But anyway, we had this huge time jump, and we couldn't go with the old characters because stuff happens with them that some of them are no longer alive, and some of them are trapped forever in time prison. So there's that. So when we did the big time jump, we decided let's introduce new characters, and season 3 was sort of a hard reset on what we were doing in a way that was still related to the plot, which they didn't see until much later, but I promise was there.
Yeah, and
then the artwork was Sade's doing.
Oh, yes, of course. Amazing art and amazing ploy. Whatever wonderful little machinations in the background led to me seeing that art. I think I started following y'all on Patreon and saw kind of like the preview of the art, maybe even before you had started releasing season 4 or only had the session zeros out. So it was like one of those things where it's like I've been meaning to listen to them, and this feels like a good place to jump in. And so it was fun as a listener, having not heard the previous seasons, and like picking up on a lot of kind of cues. Like you could tell when things were connecting to previous seasons, I think, even as someone who hadn't done a full like binge listen. And so I think season 4 did a perfect job of like hinting at those things as well. And then that's when I started going back and getting the context and getting the backstory, and starting even just talking more with you, because I was like, dang, they are doing far more world building here than just like a monster of the week fun romp through this alternate universe or magical realism type horror version of Chicago.
Yeah, and that was, I think we started out really heavy in season 1, especially with the sort of monster of the week flavor, where it wasn't necessarily one a week, but like you would have little bursts or little shorter arcs that were all tied together. And I don't think it was until the end of the season that they were like, oh shit, this was all a thing. And I was like, yes, it was all a thing. So that whole tying of things together, I'm not a person who likes to just set things down and then never touch them again. If you give me something, I may not use it for a while, but it's going in the back pocket and I will be coming back to it at some point, which is really fun, but also really terrible for the characters, because they're like, yeah, I made this really like sad, tragic backstory for them. And I'm like, great, I'm going to clobber you with it. I hope you're ready. Let's have a chat about how this is going to hurt. So yeah, and dirty confession time. I didn't really know how I wanted everything to come together until after season 2 and between seasons 2 and 3. And that's when I was like, okay, I've set a stage here. What did I do? What do I do with this now? And then after that, that's when it really, when it got really concentrated there for a bit. And I want to say that's where we really picked up our group, was in seasons 3 and especially towards the end of season 4.
Yeah.
Just as players and storytellers and co-world builders, it really took off, I think.
Absolutely. And yes, I think I think the other cool thing about the term you just used, co-world builders, is that not only do you take that factor with your players, which, for example, allowing yourself as NPCs or your players to suddenly come up with the lovely version of the future lift, which is now ride in your world. You know, that aspect of improv and world building happening real time at the table, but also the idea that there are world builders in terms of the connections that you've made in the TTRPG podcast or streaming community, and bringing those folks in to create characters in your world and kind of do their own thing, sometimes doing weird little crossovers and such with other projects. Do you want to kind of highlight a few of your favorite moments or characters that have, you know, joined your project as, you know, through guest stars and stuff like that?
Man, we've been really fortunate in getting a lot of our friends involved in the podcast. And I think that it started with the Road to Escalante project, which you and Taylor joined for. And that was such, I listened back to it and I still almost laughed myself to tears. So starting there, and while those stories weren't like canon stories necessarily, I consider those sort of like alternate universe versions of what happened.
Yeah.
I think that really set up the idea that we can get our friends involved in a way that also expands the universe, because that's world building is a huge endeavor. That is a lot of pressure that I kind of had a crutch on because we're set in Chicago. So I have a setting that is very much established already, and I can kind of just do with it what I will and destroy parts of the city as need arises. But getting to pull people in for those co-world building sessions really helped make it not just Chicago that we occasionally blow up, but it was really its own version of that reality. Gosh, notable ones. They're all notable. I remember every single one of them, but
well, yeah.
The Lakeshore
ahead.
and Limbo crew joining us was a big one. That one I think was more foundational, especially to the later seasons, than I think they expected it to be, because the events that they went through, both in their Halloween special when they were playing kids and in the Christmas special where they were adult versions of those children, those really impacted things that happen in seasons 3 and 4. I think maybe my favorite project was the Judge Foundation, where we had people come in from, like, we had Lucas from Ballad of the Seven Dice and Diana from MCT, and we had both you and Taylor on, and Sean from Omen, and we had a couple of our patrons jump in, which was like, that was really fun. I like seeing them get invested, not just like we're your patrons, but also actually invested in the podcast world that we had set up. That was really cool, because like, yeah, I just made up this huge shell company that's kind of evil and super sketchy, but there are actual people who still work here, and they believe in what you're doing, and there are little people involved in this huge shady shit show that are going to be impacted by all of it, which really is that was the whole vibe, is like, what kind of evil do you want? Do you want the evil that's one that you recognize and is culturally accepted because we need them to be there for capitalist reasons, or do you want the one that's going to swallow the world?
Yeah,
status quo or absolute chaos.
Yeah, porque no los dos, or like, why not all three kind of thing, right? Like, I feel like you have levels of that foundation where it is just the starstruck PC who loves stars and starts working there almost intern level, and then you have the, you know, Sebastian, who's just like so embedded into the leadership and the higher levels, and is in the know in terms of the nefarious things in the history of the Foundation. And I think too, like even just using the word foundation, I have found to be like kind of, I don't know if it was on purpose, but it feels like a brilliant move, because this is going to sound really cynical. As someone who's worked in nonprofits most of his adult life, I know that slapping a name on something like foundation makes it seem charitable, I suppose, and seems to be like serving its citizens. So I don't know if that was like a part of the ruse or if it was just kind of like a throwaway word, but I've always loved that nature of the whole organization kind of being its own character, and that character being developed over the course of the 4 seasons just on its own has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was 1,000% intentional. They want to seem to the public as like this necessary force of good so that they can get away with whatever they need to. And
Right.
I think that goes back to just the character who founded it, because he's objectively awful. So fun to play, but objectively terrible.
Right.
And there's a part of him that will always be that fucking awful. And it'll be the part that is willing to do whatever we got to do to achieve the goal, whatever that goal may be. And the Foundation really just sprung up around that, where he's like, okay, well, I know too much now. How do I not just profit off of it, but also make sure that we do the least amount of cosmic damage possible, considering the whole arc of the first season was the players learning that their characters were not actually the good guys. So
yeah,
we had a big "Are we the baddies?" moment.
we love to see it.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, I
Kinda.
am guilty of throwing that into the CQ first season as well. I think it was more apparent at the front, and my PCs were more just playing along. But yeah, by the middle to end of the first season, they had their like come to terms talk of like, okay, are we going against our own, hierarchy here? Are we throwing everything out the window and changing something up? Which is just so fun to do as a GM, to have the bait and switch that works, that doesn't like upset your players or listeners in our case. And I always kind of refer back to some solid advice that I got from like one of the few creative writing courses I took, was that a good short story, or good story in general, its ending should be both surprising and yet expected. And I think that's a lot of the groundwork, potentially more so for folks doing RPGs other than the classic fantasy genre, with D&D and Pathfinder and such, but especially like in horror, when you have so much of masks being pulled and these kind of pulled from under the players and the audience. And so I think it invites the writer or the game master to then spend that extra energy to make sure that there are those breadcrumb trails leading up to the reveals, so that you're not just pissing off your players, but also B, your listeners can be like, whoa, they referenced that back in this episode or this session or whatever, and can be excited about a reveal, rather than just like, oh, you kind of put the carrot in front of the horse for all this thing, and just to lead me to like a dark pit.
Yeah, you dropped me down, which like I am guilty of doing that to you, but
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a little too on the nose for a certain guest that
Yeah.
I played.
But no, that's being intentional about it is, I think, where a lot of the work comes in for, especially for horror GMs, because it's when you're playing that kind of game, your characters need to know that they can die. They need to know that there are real stakes, and they have to consider their actions pretty carefully, because by nature, it's not quite as forgiving. So, capitalism is the enemy of binging. Absolutely. Um, so having it be like, yeah, your character can die. I'm not going to lie to you about this, but I'm not going to let it be cheap, because nobody likes that. That's not fun when it's just death for the sake of you tripped and broke your neck on something because you critically failed. Like, that's
Right.
not great for storytelling. That's going to lead to pissed off characters and pissed off players, like, and not in a fun way. I've definitely made them angry because they were like, God damn you, why have you done this to us? But don't stop. And that's different from them being like, okay, we need to have a chat because this was shit. Which, again, as a GM, you need to also be open to. That happens. You're going to fuck up at some point. And
Yeah.
you need to have that kind of space to have the chats with your players about how things are going at the table. And if you have, I toe the line pretty carefully between surprising them and ambushing them, because the difference I feel is like, am I going to traumatize you, the player, by doing this, or am I just going to traumatize your character? Like, I don't want to traumatize you. So we'll have a chat. Like, this episode's going to be intense. Prep yourself for that. If you're not in the right headspace, we're not going to do it. We'll reschedule. I'd rather you be ready for this than not.
Right.
And
Which is
I recommend
super
having
crucial.
those checks in place.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, especially for horror, because it is so subjective and so personal. And you don't really know if you're going to trigger someone until it's done. And that's a pretty upsetting thing to hear, that, like, because that's never the intention. You just want to have fun. So if you're hurting someone,
Right.
that's a problem. So, yeah, everything has to be very carefully, if not planned, because God knows one die roll is going to change everything, but
Mm-hmm.
it has to be well intentioned from the start.
Yeah, and kind of like to both extremes. When the die roll is a 2, which in Call of Cthulhu is amazing, critical success,
Yeah.
nigh
Great
impossible.
success.
And then as opposed to a 99, which is like the criticalist of errors. Oh no, the oh no era.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm starting my oh no era right here and now with this 98
Oh
I
dear.
just rolled. And
Live, laugh, toaster bath.
and I think that you're right in terms of, especially with horror, and this is where, like, you know, the system is made for the storytelling as opposed to the storytelling only ever having to adhere to the system. And again, that's that razor's edge that a game master is always kind of walking on, and not just in like Call of Cthulhu, but also in like D&D and other role-playing games where you can prep so much, you can do the session zeros, you can even do the, I've done your consent checklist of like 100 different subjects or things that could be touched on, but there's always going to be those one or two moments where you as the GM are like, fuck, I didn't prepare for this, but also this is kind of brilliant. Like, and when you're treading those waters all together, like the players and the GM, it can be really terrifying, but also very exciting. So have there been some of those moments in recording where suddenly it's like in this unknown water where it's also like unknown for you, like how could I have even ever planned for this, whether it was a die roll or a decision or whatever?
Yeah. Constantly, I would say. And I'm like, so as like a writer, you have two sorts of planners. You have the pantsers who go by the seat of their pants. You have the plotters who plot everything. And I don't think that unless you are really running something on rails, that plotting too much is going to serve you and your game. It has its moments where that's really necessary, but overall, you have to be flexible. There were several times the ending of season 2, the dice just did what the dice did. And that, I think that pissed off the players, but in a way that was like, that's just baseball for you. Like, can't help that. And then in season 3, there was that one dice roll that changed everything, where this hamster was suddenly not just a hamster anymore.
Right.
And I didn't plan that. I could not have planned that. I knew I had to do something with him, but I didn't know what that was going to be. And how that wound up playing out was me just being like, okay, I failed this roll. I need a minute to think about it. And I think that especially for GMs just getting started, there's this like mentality that you have to keep moving no matter what, but you don't. You can just sit there and be like, okay, I really need a minute to figure out what in the hell happens after this, because I was not expecting this. And it's okay to have that pause. Like, even on a live stream, if something like that had happened, I'd have been like, okay, guys, riff for about 30 seconds because I don't know what to do here. And it's okay to make that pause if it's going to make the story better. I would rather have a minute to think and get us going down a fun track than I would just going full bore with no idea what was happening.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, wow, like I was about to have a revelatory moment where I was like, thank you so much for that permission, because I don't think I've ever done that. I think I've always been in a recording session like, go, go, go. We got to get this done. We got to get to this part where, you know, when you're GMing for especially something that's being recorded to be consumed later by an audience, you know, so many different plates are spinning for you as the director of not only the game and the narrative, but also as the like creator and director / producer or whatever, however many hats you're wearing at that point. Like a Dr. Seuss hat just full of other hats. And
God, yeah.
But I do now think, thinking back to especially finales where things have happened and stuff that was conceptual in my big plot brain and in my notes and such, and suddenly they're becoming real and it's like living in front of me. It's like suddenly the Frankenstein monster is alive and I now have to talk to it or like deal with it. It's no longer just like a concept. I think I have played into those moments and been like, okay, bathroom break, and then we'll come back to this, and been like literally, okay, what the fuck am I gonna do?
Yeah.
And then the stuff that comes out of that, like there was a moment at the end of season 2 of ChasmQuest where I pulled Taylor aside, and I honestly cannot remember if I had planned for this, but I said, here are your options. You have option A or option B. It came down to a yes or no question from the BBEG to his PC, and I did not tell him at the time, like, based on you saying yes or no to this, there will be huge ramifications and consequences for the following seasons that I wasn't even sure of yet, because this was, again, a finale episode, and I was going to spend X amount of months planning for the next season. And I got to be like, okay, are you, like, you're like, did you choose this or did you choose that? Because we kind of like cut his scene on a cliffhanger, and his choice completely changed how the whole course, like the whole universe shifted to fit his answer in that moment. And if I hadn't taken that time, if I had tried to like rush into the next sequence or whatever, there wouldn't have been that fun improv drama of that episode. And then the following things that happened in the next couple seasons to like follow up on that.
Yeah, that's part of what makes GMing so fun, honestly, is like I can make all of these really well-intentioned plans and plot out stuff, and then that immediately gets checked out, which I know sounds really contrary to what I just said, but that sort of ever-shifting nature of the story is what makes it really fun to do with other people, because like I can't control what they're going to decide to do. I can
Right.
encourage them not to do certain things. If it's going to be really detrimental, I'll be like, okay, well, if you do that, that's fine, but consequences, I can't tell you no.
Right.
But I don't think I've ever well, that's not true. I've only said an outright no once or twice, and I think that they were like, I don't like to do that, because it's like, this is what you want to do, this is where you want to take your story, that's fine. It's usually a no, but you could do this, or here's why I don't think that you can like physically pull this off in the story, as physical as it can get anyway. Here's the rationale behind the decision.
Right.
There's always other options at play, and I think that if you're a super, not to say control freak, but if you really like to have things on rails, you got to have the right group of people for it, because you're not going to have fun if there's a bunch of chaos gremlins in your group just doing whatever they feel like. Where like I've definitely played in games where the GM had a very set idea in mind for this big diplomatic crisis, and I was like, we could just play beach volleyball to solve it. And his face, I remember his face very clearly.
Yes.
He was like, fine, but I just am doing this to get rid of you.
That's great. Yeah, you just
So you have to have like the right tables set up for the right sort of
Right.
adventures.
Yeah, if there's any giraffe centaurs at your table, it's probably not the
I love Jira.
Okay, that was a personal dig. I
Draft
apologize.
Centaur was great.
No,
That's
I
okay.
just
The next character I made was actually bigger than her. So
Oh god. Yeah, the more I pick on you about it, I feel like the worse it's gonna be the next time I GM for you. What I was gonna say is like in that moment, like the look on that GM's face, like I just imagined them like taking a spiral notebook and like taking a lighter and just like lighting like the whole thing, like political intrigue mechanics for the next 5 sessions. Woof, just gasoline gone.
replaced with beach volleyball.
Okay, so
Yeah, chaos is good until it makes the DM feel helpless. That's absolutely true.
Yeah, I threw up in the chat that anyone could ask questions, and Pennis says that chaos is good until the DM is literally feeling helpless. Nice, and some references. Yeah, are there? I feel like because we do that scaffolding work, and I don't want to speak for you, but I feel like I don't ever feel like I become helpless necessarily. If it is a situation where things are so off the rails, it's usually because it's a one shot or like a shorter module, or like you said earlier, it's something that's live, so there's a little bit more of a performance aspect to it. Like you kind of want to see that reaction either in the chat or from other people, where I think the players are a little bit more on each other's heels with the next comment or dig or whatever. So I think I don't know if I want to turn that into a question of like, how do you then like harness that chaos, I suppose, because I don't know if you can ever really have a plan for like, okay, if chaos happen, I do XYZ. It's not like coding. It's almost like it's I feel like it's more like surfing. Like you don't know the size of the wave until you're on it, and only if you've practiced multiple times with lots of different styles of waves or whatever, speeds or sizes or what have you, yeah, you kind of gotta like learn to adapt to it.
Yep. And I wish there were like set advice that I could give for
Yeah.
a situation, because like I've definitely run off the rails before. I've had players run off the rails before, and trying to steer that just takes practice, and it takes knowing your players a bit too, to know like, okay, I can't always predict what you're gonna do, but on the whole I can see where you're going with this and I trust you. um
Yeah.
but I also love a bit, and I will commit to that bit, especially like Lucas from Ballad and Sam on the Lovelies. If we get in a bit loop, we will go until we have to stop recording.
It's
Otherwise, like, it just happens, and that's just sort of different table chemistry for you.
Right.
And I don't know if I'm perfect at it by any means, but like, I think just knowing what your players are doing and spending time with them and playing with them, and after a while you kind of get a feel for where that wave is actually taking you. And sometimes you have to be like, okay, we need to stop because I don't know what the fuck's going on.
Well, that's why a bathroom break
Stop
is
here.
so
This is a
great.
good point to pause.
And
Yeah.
on that note, a
Get
word
some
from our
pizza and come back.
sponsors. And it's like, Andrew, we don't have any
Yeah.
sponsors for this. I don't know, make some shit up. Who cares? Just say like Lisa
Yeah,
Mattress or
yes.
something.
Yeah. Make it up. Do something. Anything.
Oh, perfect. I feel like our chat is teaming up on said AJ.
Oh, AJ's a good sport. Belry is an agent of chaos, and I think Nikolai and I are very similar in that we have a player that we'll just absolutely run with.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I love a good bit. I
Yeah.
mean, other than the first episode of ChasmQuest, where I literally thought the whole project was going to have to be trashed because they renamed the ship the Naked Lady. It wasn't until we
Yeah.
recorded what was then episode 2 that I was like, okay, I guess it's okay that there's humor in this, right? The
Yeah.
only reason this is actually funny to my players is because of how seriously I'm taking this. And so that was kind of the breaking of the ice, and the beginning of what would be like the polarization of like my guys coming to the table with bits planned, like, you know, one of them is a wrestling halfling barbarian, and me with like my whole okay, it's gonna be like Game of Thrones, but it's gonna be like shot like the New World movie, where it's like all slow and dramatic and stuff. So it's like like you could keep that drama and you can keep the bits, and then eventually your table, if you work together and if you trust each other and you do your yes ands and your no buts, except not no buts, no comma buts. Anyway,
Yeah, definitely butts are involved.
yeah,
no matter
butts are
what. It's a
always
Lovecraftians
involved in
project, there's a butt in
RPGs.
it.
If there's no butts in your RPGs, what are you doing? Roll for butts.
I don't even want to be there.
Yeah, I'm just catching up with some of the chat.
I've actually DM'd for Belry before, and yeah, it was chaos, but it was very fun. So, can attest.
Okay, yeah.
He doesn't even know that we're talking mad shit about him.
Cass is being praised for her management of chaos, which is good. Yeah, I feel like,
Cheers, thank you.
especially because the first interaction I had the first time I ever played Call of Cthulhu or had you as a GM was for the Road to Escalante project, and I felt like in those moments we were able to bring those bits to the table, but then could also lean into the more like emotional moments as well. Like I could do the goofy ass horse that I picked, and
Daisy the pony.
Daisy the pony, and just being like the most derpiest of horses of all time. and yet riding into like this weird snake cult situation by the end of it and being like fighting for my life, rolling those D100s and just praying. It was such a fun spectrum of experience and emotion. I think that's like so fun. And I think horror films capture that. Like some of the best horror is horror that doesn't take itself too seriously. Like you have your Ari Aster, like you have your like intense, immersive, you know, like the Babadook as well. I feel like doesn't really have many funny moments. That has memeable moments, but not intentionally funny.
Very memeable.
But I think some of the most popular horror has this aspect of you're on a ride, we're here to have fun. I mean, you introduced me to Mandy just a couple weeks ago when we were hanging out, and God, was that a ride. Like, and that was a perfect example of storytelling and horror genre writing not taking itself too seriously, and yet, you know, going to the nth degree with its intensity as well.
Yeah, I think for movies especially, you have a little bit more leeway on whether you want to embrace the camp or if you want it to be super serious, Haunted of Hill House, everyone's gonna cry forever.
Right.
And you have to make that decision kind of out the gate. Like, if we had just been serious the entire time, I think that it really would have exhausted the players. I think that there wouldn't have been little moments where they could let off kind of steam, because they are dealing with these like huge cosmic issues, then their lives are in danger all of the time. So not being able to laugh about it a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
I think that would have worn them down too much. And I'm not opposed to having those moments where they can laugh, because those moments give them time to connect to each other in a way that isn't tragic, and they can kind of joke about it a little bit. And I also think that's just who we are as people, is like, I made the live, laugh, toaster bath joke, but like kind of like we embrace the dark humor because it's what allows us to continue functioning. Sometimes that's it. Like, you have to have a way out. And had it just been Haunting of Hill House for 4 seasons, they would have been haggard as hell.
Right.
It's exhausted. I don't think they would have stayed for it.
Yeah. It's the reason that, like, I think it's the reason that horror has suspense in the first place, because the jump scare or the moment of intensity is only intense because it's juxtapositioned against the 20 minutes of like otherness, like whether it's normality that's trying to be pushed, or like suspense that's being built up, or like a little bit of unnerving, and then suddenly a switch goes off. Like, the reason those moments stick out to you is because there's that quiet along with the loud, or the chaos along with the order, or the darkness with the humor or levity, if you will.
It's that little bit of sugar makes the awful garbage tasting medicine go down just a little bit more.
Love it. Yeah, just catching up with the chat still. Always plug in the Lovelies and everything you work on, Cass, because
Y'all, stop.
just a master of creating an immersive experience that's also just always going to be fun, you know.
Well, that's the goal. Like, it's a game. If you're not having fun with it, you're doing it wrong. And even if that I'm having fun with it is horribly traumatizing your characters, like, it still has to be something that you and your players get out of. Like, what am I growing as a person with this? Am I just having fun? There has to be something. It can't just be like, well, I guess I'm here and I got to do it.
Yeah,
that never lends well to anything.
Yeah, I think it's that whole thing too of like, when your hobby becomes a job, and we could probably go a whole nother hour talking about how
Oh my God, yeah.
making that, decision to turn your gaming table into a source for content creation for the public, the world. There's people across the world listening to something that happened in my friend's kitchen at his dining room table is just really odd. And it wasn't OnlyFans, but
That's later.
that's for the
then
$69 Patreon tier. So
hell yeah.
no, it's just like this weird aspect of like making sure that fun is still there while also still managing things, because the dream is like, oh, I want to do this all the time with my friends, blah, blah, blah. I want to be the Critical Role, I want to be the Dimension 20 or whatever, but there's also a sense of like, do I like what needs to happen for that to be quote unquote successful in a sense that I'm still enjoying what I'm doing, because I don't want to be the Critical Role if suddenly I have to be the CEO of like a multi-million-dollar company as well as planning this, narrative thing at the table. I just, there has to be that sense of balance, and only until you've been doing it for a few years, like I think both of us, we've been doing it for around 5 years or more, and there's the ebb and flow of like really intensely being consumed by it, and then learning, whether on your own or having to be taught, that you need that balance of like work and rest and kind of taking care of the other things in your life, as well as doing this passion project or this hobby. I think those lessons and getting to a place where you're like comfortable with like a come what may kind of thing. I know we're getting meta about doing podcasting more, but I feel like it also talks to the vibes at the table itself.
Yeah, and it is like, it's a phenomenal amount of work to try and run the business aspect of a podcast, which if you're thinking about monetizing at any point, you really need to start thinking about that like at the beginning of your project. Because it has a lot of impact that down the line you're going to want to have this structure in place so that you can do all of this stuff. That said, never go into it thinking you're going to make any amount of money. Like, I'm just happy if we can cover our server costs. Like, hooray,
Right.
We broke even there. And it is like life has a way of enforcing when you need to take a break, whether you want it or not. And finding the balance, not that I'm an expert at that by any means, because I'm currently like working through my own burnout from project work, but you're gonna have to sit down and take a minute at some point. And like during quarantine, this was the perfect project. I would have gone absolutely insane without it.
100%.
But you can't keep that momentum forever. Like, priorities are going to shift. Life is going to happen, and it's going to take you out of the cycle of being able to do podcasting work for a bit. And it's okay to take that break and be like, hey, we just need to be on hiatus for a minute. And if it's between seasons, that's the perfect time for it. If it's mid-season and you're like, okay, I need to hit a reset for a couple weeks, I'm very sick, I have no voice, I'll be back when we're back. Like, that's okay. Once you've established a sort of reliability in when you release episodes and your listeners know that you will be there once you're physically able to do that, they're very forgiving. They're a lot more forgiving than you think that they are. And they'll just be as stoked when you come back as anything. But yeah, if you don't take those breaks and you don't enforce that space for yourself, then life will find a way to make it happen. With or without your consent.
Right. No, totally. And you got me kind of thinking about just what this community has become in general, because I think when we started, there was kind of a more thin, spread out kind of community. There was small batches and stuff that you as that I, at least as a content creator, was like, okay, well, it seems like these folks and these folks are doing things and they are fun to work with and we can trust to, like, collaborate with them. And I think over the years it's been so fun to, like, take what we've learned and also kind of take how we've learned that other folks are experiencing a lot of the same things, the same challenges or the same questions or desires that we're facing as these, like, independent creators with these fan bases all of a sudden, with, these Patreons to manage and now, like, LLCs and all that kind of fun stuff, quote unquote. And like, I think when you're faced with all that stuff at first, it seems so overwhelming, and it's like, oh, this wasn't on my list of things to do when I decided to have my friends sit down in front of microphones and play a game and roll dice. Like, I wasn't envisioning the future of my eyeballs, like, burning to tears in front of the editing software because I'm like, the finale's gotta come out next week. That's not the moment you're envisioning.
This 1 millisecond is killing me.
Nobody
else is gonna give a shit about it, but I hear it.
Yeah, who the fuck is eating chips during this scene? Why?
Shoot down that plane. Get out of here.
And I think it's like, those aren't necessarily the moments you're like, okay, this is why we're doing this. But I think once we were able to kind of land from the initial getting launched into the world and just being like, do people like this? Like, should we keep doing this? And kind of being caught by the rest of the community, especially by other people who are doing the same thing, who kind of went out on that limb and made that same decision. And it feels really good too to kind of, like, pass it along, or I don't want to use the term pay it forward, but I felt like after I established my own comfort and had kind of balmed the anxieties of the initial years of starting this project, I then got to see other projects start up or gain momentum and kind of come alongside them and just be like, hey, if you have any questions, let us know. Or I'm just always going to be, like, retweeting your stuff and promoting you and downloading your episodes. And that's kind of how I got a relationship with the Try Not to Die folks and had Noah on to interview them last month. And it's like, it's just really cool to lean on this community and then also be the person that somebody else can lean on. And I think that's a really great aspect of this content creation community, because I don't think that a lot of other public figure type or content creation types have that same community that isn't competitive or cutthroat or anything like that. Maybe because there is no monetize, there is nothing to gain. It's like, hey, we're just all here hanging out, rolling dice.
No money here for anybody. Yeah, exactly. And, like, the community honestly surprised me, because I went into it like, this is the early days of female-driven podcasts coming out, especially in this sphere, and like at the, I think, Venture Maidens and Fate and the Fable Maidens and D20 Dames, they were big as I was getting us up and running as well. So it was like, while there might have been an internal need to fight for a space, I never felt like I actually had to fight for space in the podcast, the TTRPG community. It's always been incredibly supportive. And I know that there are pockets where it's toxic as hell, but we've been incredibly fortunate for the most part I don't have any specific backing for that. It just felt like I needed a qualifier in there. But it just feels like we were very much welcomed in, and we were joining up at the same time as all of our current like pod friends, and we came in at the cohort level like that together. So it was all about learning from each other because we were all learning at the same time. No one knew what we were doing, and it was just all about like, yeah, we're gonna bootstrap this together, and we're here for one another because our audiences do cross over so much that like we're not competing. I'm never competing with Critical Role. I will lose that fight 1,000 times. Like, so going into that knowing that I'm not competing for that same point is like, okay, well, I can just have fun now because like it doesn't matter. And if you have fun with what you're doing, that's gonna translate in what people are hearing, and they're gonna want to listen into it more. It gives a little bit of authenticity that
Right.
I think is really hard to capture and also incredibly invaluable. And to see your friends doing that too, that's even better. Like, they're having fun. I love them. You should listen because they're fun. Like,
Yes.
it's just a really great community.
And I go back to some of those early days, and I think one of the main stories that I would hear of projects that would kind of like discontinue or just kind of like fall to the wayside was because there was like an unhealthy dynamic, more even more so out of game but also at the table, and that's that aspect that I think needs to be emphasized, that if you're going to go into content creation, having that like plot or control of the narrative or the table, it's going to get eroded pretty quickly. And if you stay like stalwart, especially as the GM or even as a player too, if you have like a specific concept in mind coming to this improv roll of the dice chance game, any tabletop role-playing game that relies on chance, just because you like min-max your character and have this expectation that they will never die, like something's going to happen. The GM might throw something at you that doesn't require a roll to try to save yourself. And it's just like, that's the reality of it. But some of the projects that I've heard didn't quite make it through that initial time was because, there were folks part of the project who were trying to hold on to such a specific thing that they were creating an environment that wasn't fun to listen to, and you could tell wasn't fun to play for the people who were a part of that project. And I think capturing that, or not even capturing that, but trying to make sure that you're staying within that realm of like you said, fun, like we should be having fun. This is a game, right? Like having that balance there is super crucial. And I think fans can pick up on that pretty early in those parasocial relationships or whatever.
Yeah. Oh boy, parasocial relationships. That's another topic that can go on for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think maybe because I have a history of doing community work with creative types, I know how quickly projects can fold.
Yeah.
I love creative types. We're great people, but we're also dramatic as all fuck. So
For sure.
to get a group that you can play with long term and has good chemistry is insanely rare and very valuable. And my players will tell me, especially after they've played with someone else, they're like, yeah, you spoil us as a GM. Like I would say that I worry that I baby them sometimes on the like prep side or the like aftercare side of things, the before and after the game, where we set the stage and then we like go into our mental mudroom and kick off our boots and talk about what happened. Like I worry sometimes that I baby them,
Right.
but I feel like without that sort of framework in mind and without that sort of space to actually have honest conversations about how you think the game is going, you do fall into that I have one player who's being a piece of shit and it's ruining it for everyone. So we need to have a chat about this.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
and giving players the space where they feel safe having that conversation is very important, at least to me.
Absolutely. And I think that's the difference of having your at-home game versus a like content creation game that not everyone knows there is that difference going into it when they first begin. When I was first even just thinking about doing a show, there weren't many shows that I was even consuming. Like I maybe had 2 or 3 different podcasts that I had listened to, and one that I was really actually dedicated to, and was just like, this would be fun. I wonder what it would be like. And, I'm really glad I made the decision to do that. But the concept of what we would have at the table and trying to like, because the whole initial spark of wanting to share what was happening at home was because like I would have those experiences and then I would talk with those same people, and talking about what happened at the table felt like we were sharing these memories of a thing that like actually happened to us. And that's kind of the power and magic of like tabletop gaming. And there would also be times where I would be like working whatever shitty 9 to 5 and trying to tell a coworker about what happened the night before and being like, and then they rolled this, and then they literally climbed the body of the giant with their swords, and then it was crazy and blood was everywhere. And they're just like, I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. Like,
yeah,
you're
just
obviously
smiling and nodding.
yeah, you're obviously having this experience. And I was just like, I want to share that with like other people, and that was kind of like the initial sparks. And it's just so cool, like I said, to land in a community of other people who feel that way, and like the chat saying, great, fans having that sense of grace toward indie creators who, there's that understanding of like, yeah, you have lives too. You have to pay your bills. We're living under this crushing boot of an oppressive system that, systemically, disenfranchises specific people groups, and your value is based on what you produce and all this stuff. Like that same pressure is happening to our fans, and that same environment is swirling around the folks that we're reaching out to. And it's one thing to acknowledge it and say, thus I can do no more, but another thing to like acknowledge it and be like, and this is how I'm coping with it, and this is how I'm like creating rest in a world of no stops. Go, here's one thing, here's the next, and then here's 5 more things. Jenna kind of makes fun of me sometimes because she'll come into the guest room and I'll have my computer going with like an RPG show, I'll have a video game going, and then I'll have like, TikTok or like Instagram on my phone, like to scroll while the loading screen's on my video game. It's like, it's real bad sometimes. But like I said, sometimes rest comes to you, like hits you and reminds you to like take that time. And so it's just a matter of that learning curve. Once you decide to do that project, or even just starting your home game now in an environment where it's like impossible to line up 5 adults' schedules to meet once a month or once every 2 weeks, let alone to record that and set that up and then edit it and then release it, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And it's definitely a different vibe when you sit down with the mic in front of your face and you're like, shit, how do I do this again? And just getting to like play separately where not everything is content. Because like we did a homebrew game over quarantine that was not recorded, and sometimes we'll look at each other and be like, fuck, we should have recorded that. But on the whole, I was using that as a sandbox for a bunch of ideas that I wanted to play with, and I didn't really want to have that out in the world yet. 2, it was just nice to just play and not have the pressure of having to listen back and being like, that's where I fucked up. Or I have to perform more than usual because there's a mic in my face and we've actually hit the record button. Not that I can't just whoops delete all of this, but still, like,
Yeah.
it relieves a little bit of pressure, and it lets you tell different stories that you wouldn't necessarily tell on the podcast, and just engage in more escapism. But the podcast is nice because you can have your escapism that's a shared, like, fever dream sometimes, where
Right.
it's not just for you. There's people also engaging in your crazy imagination world. And I actually really love that. I love seeing that people comment on it and sometimes get mind blown and sometimes be like, God damn you, Cassie. And I'm like, I know. It's just the worst, isn't it?
Yeah, I remember the first like fan art that we saw, like some from our friend and patron and Discord admin Irene and Ray, and seeing some of those very early, like we were still releasing our first season and seeing fan art and stuff. It was just like so mind blowing, and us in our group chat like sending it to each other, and like you said, it's like, oh, this shared fever dream, like other people are picturing what we're picturing in our brains during this like group hallucination sans mushrooms, like such a cool moment. And yeah, I think we're super fortunate that this is a community that is willing to cushion that fall rather than kind of like reject or bounce you away for whatever dumb reason that they might come up with.
Not that the TTRPG community is immune from cancel culture, but
for sure.
sometimes people deserve that. Like, I hear about drama kind of tangentially because I don't, like, the only reason I have Twitter is for the podcast and I don't really engage with it. And the only reason I hear about it is from other people and they're like, did you hear what happened? I was like, no, I don't give a fuck. Do we not like this person for a good reason? Because I'll unfollow them. Just tell me that. Like,
Right.
if they're being scummy, I don't want to associate with them, but I'm just not engaging. And like that's a stopgap that I've put in for myself and for my own mental health. Was like,
For sure.
I'm not going to play into this. That's exhausting. And I have my own shit to do that's not this. And I don't want to deal with these people. If they're garbage, let's just be done with them. We don't have to engage in this if you don't want to. And
right.
I will say that has helped immensely over the last few years, especially.
Yeah.
Just having a break in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think it comes with just the maturing that happens in general, as an adult, learning boundaries and all these kind of like basic concepts for, you know, caring for your emotional or mental health and well-being, and then applying that, you know, not in like not in an intense way, because I think you're right, there are folks that can kind of get caught up in that rolling wheel of like, if somebody is like S tier dirtbag, it's like really fun to jump on that train and like pummel them down as hard as possible. Like some of the shit we've seen on RPG Twitter, like people creating literal websites to, you know, continue like this whole, I was about to say smear campaign, but it was like people sharing their stories. Like, it's important work, but I think there's also an aspect of like, was this, you know, at what point does it stop being healthy for you to like chase down those? At what point are you protecting yourself and protecting your community? And are you like, it's that weird thing of like, are you chasing clout, like to jump on this dissing of whatever thing? And we, you know, you kind of saw it like with, you know, January was fun of this year to like the whole community could just like join together and shitting on Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro.
Wizards, yeah.
And, you know, we came out of that wonderful kickoff to the new year. I think within this community with this knowledge of, because like I feel like so many creators, content creators or like YouTubers, gained a much larger, wider platform because of that time. And I'm not saying that that was necessarily a bad thing, but in the end, like, what is sustaining for a community or listenership or viewership is more so those shared experiences rather than shared woes. Like, you can share the woes, but you also have to have like good experiences also to lean on, that kind of brevity, or I think I meant to say levity, within these like intense situations, because like it's so easy to glue yourself to a show when you're like anxious and waking up and checking the news about what next update there is. But it's another thing to just like wake up and look at the general chat on your fan Discord and just be like, hey, how's everybody doing? Is your Friday okay? And and how's it going? I think there has to be that balance like we talked about earlier when you're doing something so public.
Yeah. Well, you have to be mindful that, like, yes, this public person did something shitty, but also at this point, you are a public person. So you need to be careful what you say. You need to be very mindful about the message that you put out, and you need to be consistent. Like, and consistently true to yourself, really. Like, unless yourself is a garbage person, and then don't do that. But like,
S tier garbage
it's been pretty
person.
easy for us. Yeah, S tier trash. It's been pretty easy for the lovelies and I, because we all have very similar views of the world. We have very similar ideals. So when something fucky happens, I might drop a chat in the like lovelies only channels of our Discord server and be like, hey, I want to put out a message about this. Is this okay? How does this make you feel? And I want to get your feedback before I do it, because I don't want this huge event to go without comment. But I want to make sure that I'm representing everyone correctly as we do this, because this is coming from the lovelies. This isn't coming from Cassie personally. This is on behalf of the podcast. And you're speaking for more than yourself. So you need to make sure that the message that you are putting out there is, one, something that needs to be said at all. And anytime that we're like, yeah, fuck old white men, down, that I'm here for it.
Click, press the red button, go for it.
Send, go immediately.
That's the tweet.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
There have been a couple of times where that's definitely been the case, where we're like, I'm tired of having to issue this statement. Y'all are shit. Get it together.
Work on some stuff, and then we can
we're
chat.
mindful.
Yeah.
Is this the thing that we want to say for everybody? Because it isn't just me.
What's that, Cass? Thinking before speaking? What?
I know. Crazy.
What is that even?
Never. I barely know.
We're just little babies. We're just babies.
Just babies. Just adult babies with bills and taxes.
Ugh, gross. I think I've already gone 15 minutes over what I promised this interview to be. So I think so that we're not ending on the word taxes, I think I will ask something that I had been thinking about today, just because I'm getting into horror movie podcasts where they just talk about horror movies, especially ones that I haven't seen. But I've been thinking more, and with the whole Dungeons and Dragons movie coming out, like I've been burning to ask, do you think the success of the Dungeons and Dragons movie will eventually lead to the first Call of Cthulhu movie, like franchise? Or
so cosmic horror is hard to do, and I know I've gone on this rant with you before. But I'm doing it again. I'm comfy having that chat.
Go for it.
So cosmic horror is a little bit more niche than standard horror, just by nature of what it is. Normally things in cosmic horror are just happening, and your characters are sort of just reacting to it. and they might survive. They probably won't, but they could. And audiences on the whole don't like something happening just because they want there to be a concrete reason, and they want there to be a way to stop it. And when it comes to cosmic horror, that is not a thing that really happens all that often. There's always a cost to what you're doing, and that will frequently be your life, that'll frequently be your sanity. I point to Color Out of Space as a major recent one, not just because Nicolas Cage is in it and he's absurd, and I think that when he's absurd, he's at his best work, but it's a good example of, I think, one of the only major, like, mainstream-ish cosmic horror movies that's out there currently.
Yeah.
So the combination of something happening without a reason and there not necessarily being a happy ending really tanks it as far as American audiences are concerned. As far as like European or Japanese audiences are concerned, they're totally down for something to happen without a reason. Like, if this is just happening, that's fine. I don't want a happy ending. Happy endings, while they tie everything up nice and neat, that does not fit with the genre. So getting a major foothold for cosmic horror in American cinema is difficult. There's also the issue, at the Mountains of Madness. Yeah, that's so. There's also a running joke that cosmic horror is cursed, like the set, where it is impossible to get these movies made for one reason or another, or compounding reasons. And yeah, between that and like the subject matter, you have to be careful with, because Lovecraft was, he wasn't he was Z tier trash. He was garbage. He was a weird racist, even by weird racist standards. Yeah. So tackling that content in a way that's accessible while not being completely garbage is very difficult. Lovecraft Country did a phenomenal job with that.
I
think
felt that way
because they had Black creators was a major, like, good. I think if somebody's driving cosmic horror to be a thing, it should be creators of color, because they can make that they can tell that story in a different lens that reframes the narrative behind where this all came from. And also, I like knowing that H.P. Lovecraft is probably rolling in his grave. So there's that.
Yeah. I was going to say
that he's unhappy.
So we'll see Lars von Trier presents Call of Cthulhu, Honor Among Tentacles. I don't know.
Oh my god. Well, that's going to get into hentai very quickly. We don't. That's not going to get mainstream attention either.
Yeah, I feel like, again, I was trying to have a joke question for the end, but now my mind's reeling about all these other ideas, and we could have another hour conversation. But yeah, I don't know. I think, I don't think franchise necessarily, but I think I hope that, like, with the popularity of D&D, we do see, I hope it's more like an invitation to kind of open the gates, rather than thinking that there will be, because I think Wizards of the Coast wants us to believe that there will be this Reaganomics, like, trickle down effect of, like, give Wizards a shit ton of money and Paramount and Hasbro a shit ton of money, and then other smaller RPGs will then become popular. Like, that doesn't happen without the groundwork or the boots on the ground kind of thing, or whatever. It doesn't happen without the community kind of making it so. So I'm hoping that instead of, like, this trickle down ideology, we instead embrace it more as like an equal community, where, like, D&D and fantasy RPGs, like medieval fantasy or even Eurocentric medieval fantasy, is a part of this community, but it is not the entire community. And here are the people making things that are all these other flavors, genres, mythologies, and such. And you know, it's that same thing of like how people think of genre fiction in general in terms of like writing novels and stuff, and it's always like, oh, this person is genre bending or whatever. And it's like, I think we're finally at a postmodern state where we're like over that novelty, right? And we can now just tell stories, and they can have influence from fantasy, they can have influence from sci-fi, they can have influence from horror, and they don't have to fit a specific genre fiction label in order to be marketed. Instead, we can just tell stories that we enjoy and continue having fun with. And yes, sci-fi is
just play is sort of the motto.
Oh yeah, just play. Yeah,
sci-fi is a good stealth for Cosmic. Yeah, Event Horizon is 100%.
Yeah,
Cosmic
Event
horror.
Horizon, amazing example.
My God.
Oof. Some of those scenes still stick with me. I saw it. We did 12 hours of terror. It was like a Halloween thing that our local indie theater does, and it was one of the, so it starts at midnight and goes until, or no, it starts at like 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. That's what it was. And yeah, I know we made it to like 4, I think, if that. But one of the movies was Event Horizon, and that's the thing, nobody knows what the movies are ahead of time. And I had never seen Event Horizon, and so like seeing it in the like series of fever dream, like weird different genre horror, and then like to watch that one, it was so cool. Like it was so fun, and you know, you get over like the early 2000s CGI and stuff pretty quickly when you're experiencing it with so many other people. But yeah, the torture scene, like the hell scenes, those were apparently, they were downplayed from the original version to like make it more of a theatrical release. But yeah, I definitely want to see that director's cut for sure.
Yeah, if you can get, it's an experience, capital E experience. I would consider that one of like the foundational horror movies that people need to see at least once, because you're not going to get a lot of references otherwise. That and The Shining. Jurassic Park is another one. Psycho. It's sort of about like the hallmarks from about the 60s onward, because that's when everything really started getting weird.
Yeah, I just listened to a podcast covering Suspiria, the 2018 version.
Ooh.
And I have a weird story about that one. I went on a date with someone to watch that movie. The date didn't go well, but the movie was like phenomenal. But it was like a smaller viewing room, so it was like very claustrophobic, very gruesome scenes, very hard-hitting scenes, and I'm just like, is everyone else experiencing the same movie as me? Because I feel like I'm about to throw up, and everyone else here is just like, chill, cool.
It's just a movie.
No, but I think I was gonna say, in terms of sci-fi being a good vehicle for cosmic horror, or even existential horror, like whatever label you want to put on it, I was thinking about Sunshine, which I think came out earlier 2000s, where the guy's like obsessed, you know, he becomes this being that's like obsessed with the sun, and like it turns into sci-fi horror type thing. And then the other one too is like Melancholia. I think that actually that's Lars Van Trier movie that like kind of has that cosmic or existential horror, and like you said, it like, yeah, Sunshine is so great. I feel like it's a really underrated movie. But yeah, it was cool to see like Annihilation done as well. But again, it's like, yeah, they're not really breaking into mainstream or franchise-esque type things. And you know, I don't think it ever has to, but I do hope that with the popularity of tabletop RPGs in general, we kind of see this opening movement of more, other publishers, indie publishers, and seeing this more as a legitimized hobby or even business. And just keep seeing new things, because the more people that become part of it, the more new and fresh ideas will continue to be pumped into it, and you can keep all those like classic ideas as long as they're not harmful. But I'm excited to see where things go. And just like that, we're 30 minutes as opposed to 15 minutes past our time. This exact thing happened with Noah last month. So Cass, I want to respect your time and say thank you so much for being on Danger Mom Mondays, for this interview. Chat, everyone watching, thank you so much for joining us. I got one last chat. Honestly, found indie horror is more likely to delve into cosmic horror territory. Yeah. So I think we'll just have to continue depending on good indie stuff. Someone mentioned Guillermo del Toro. I think he is probably one of the most mainstream, as close to, cosmic horror or like fairy tale horror, or I don't even know how to describe his style.
This could honestly be a huge conversation. We should actually pull Diana in for that one.
Ooh.
Just having a cosmic horror cinema chat. Consider it. We could go on this for a while.
Absolutely. I'm here for it. I will be there. Maybe I'll set up a special Danger Mom Monday where we chat just cosmic horror in general, because I think that D&D RPG can also learn a lot from horror and cosmic horror, and some of my favorite written adventures have flavors of that. I think Pathfinder does a much better job introducing other genres than like mainstream Wizards of the Coast D&D. I mean, they're also just producing way more written material than Wizards in general, but just from what I've heard, like one of their newest adventures has folks jumping through gates into other planes or like other maybe even plant. I don't know. It's like this weird like sci-fi but also existential horror wrapped into like this, this classic fantasy RPG, and it's called like Gatewalkers, I want to say. I've only been able to read about it, but I'm like I can't wait for that to be finished and just read through it. Give more. Thank you. But yeah. Okay. Everyone have a good night. We'll have to chat cosmic horror more. And thanks for being on the show, Cass.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks y'all for joining chat. It was great chatting with you.
And join me next week. I'm going to be playing What Remains of Edith Finch. I think there's like mystery, maybe some horror elements. I don't think so much horror, but just senses of getting big mystery vibes and such. I've never played through it, never watched a playthrough, so I'm going to be playing through a couple hours because I have that day off. So come join me next Monday, Danger Mom Monday, a little cozy game playthrough of What Remains of Edith Finch. Everyone, stay rowdy.